residential schools caused many changes to the Aboriginal society. An economic change occurred because it caused psychological and intergenerational impacts, which means that through the Indian residential school system, many First Nations children suffered neglect and physical, sexual, and psychological abuse while enduring harsh living conditions under the pretense of gaining an education. As a result, many children experienced personal and cultural degradation that lasted a lifetime for many of them. Therefore, when a child is treated this way for so long, he/she learns that is how every child grows up and is treated. Therefore, in the future, when that child has its own children, he or she is going to treat their child the same way that they were treated in the school. This affects the economy greatly in a negative way because it's going to affect generations of First Nations and their children, and the cycle of abuse and mistreatment will continue for more and more generations. As a result of those economic changes, political changes also occurred. In 2007, the Government of Canada implemented the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement. This settlement agreement included Common Experience Payment, CEP, to all surviving former students of federally administered residential schools, the Independent Assessment Process, IAP, to address compensation for physical and sexual abuse, the establishment of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and healing initiatives. This is a political change because a lot of these things the government has agreed on doing include giving the First Nations money or the government losing money. This money has to come from somewhere, and the government can't pay for all of it. The Canadian tax is going to go up in order for the government to keep gaining the money they need to pay all these agreements. These residential schools aren't just going to affect the First Nations in a negative way anymore. They involve all of Canada negatively and politically. These changes are going to affect us for a very long time. But despite these changes, many parts of the Aboriginals' lives still stayed the same. For example, the First Nations cultures, the traditions, of course, and the way they lived their lives and provided for their family. The Royal Proclamation of 1763 caused many changes to the Aboriginal society in forms of politically, economically, and socially. These changes occurred because the proclamation established a new administrative structure for the economy on recently acquired territories in North America. This also established new rules and protocols for future social relations with Aboriginal peoples. The proclamation has two significant parts. First, defined the land west of the established colonies as Indian territories, where First Nations people should not be molested or disturbed by settlers, and where the Indian Department would be the primary liaison between the Crown and First Nations people. And second, in order to prevent any future abuse, the proclamation prohibited colonial governors from making any grants or taking any land cessions from First Nations people, and established a set of protocols and procedures for the purchasing of First Nations land. The Royal Proclamation gave the First Nations rights and some freedoms as well. This affected them socially because there was the decrease in new settlers, and they got more land to hunt off and make new homes. The Proclamation of 1763 is often credited with securing Indian friendships in years to come. This proclamation was a positive thing because it gave rules, freedom, equality, and ordered peace. With all the things that changed with the laws of the proclamation, there were multiple things that didn't change. The amount of land Canada had, the way First Nations survived and lived off the land, and the traditions among the cultures in Canada. The The Northwest Rebellion caused many changes to their society. A negative social change occurred because the Northwest Rebellion of 1885 was a brief uprising by the Métis people under Louis Riel, and an associated uprising by First Nations Cree against the government of Canada as well. When the uprising of this rebellion began, Louis Riel lost all support from the white settlers who had once been allies with him, and he was never able to gain the firm support of the Métis people. Even though the Métis people were defeated in the battle, Louis Riel was arrested, found guilty, and sentenced to be hung. The Métis people rose up beneath Riel because they believed he was not a good leader for Canada. The Northwest Rebellion created social change for Canada because with Riel leading the young country into two different rebellions, the Red River Rebellion and the Northwest Rebellion, his legacy today symbolizes a nation continuing to struggle to reconcile its religious and racial differences. Riel created many changes over long periods of time, mostly negative, but some positive, that still affect us today. There were areas in which Riel didn't change, like the diversity of our country stayed the same. During these changes, and Riel definitely didn't change the traditions and cultures of the different people in Canada.